Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's Wednesday, and I am Anna, and I cannot be more excited because we are having a money date. I hope you've had a great week so far. It's actually been a short week since Monday was the holiday. So I have an interesting topic for you to tune in today, and I want to chat about merging finances. This is a question that comes quite a bit with my clients, and I thought that it's worth discussing. So let's see what ideas I've got for you. Hi, Wanda. Thanks for hopping on. Good to have you. But as you know, what we do on money dates is actually we check in with ourselves. This is the time you dedicate to pay attention to where your finances are as of today, how everything has been. We just started 2018, so hi AJ, thanks for hopping on. Good to have you. Welcome. We just started 2018. I know a lot of you put New Year's resolutions in terms of what you're going to do better, so I hope that personal finance is one of those. But here's what Money Date is meant to be. You guys been watching me for a while. I'm continuing the same discussion, but it's meant to be to remind you to go back and check how are you progressing in terms of your income generation. So that's question number one. How much money have you earned? In terms of your spending, how much money have you spent, right? Are you staying within the budget that you've set up for yourself? And a third thing is, how are you progressing in terms of your savings goals, right? That's it. Those are the stopping points along the way. Every week is what we have to know for ourselves. And that's why I started a money date. Now, you guys, just a reminder for those of you watching it for the first time, I'd like to suggest to use tools to help you answer these kinds of questions, okay? There's no way that in the modern world we live today, you actually have to do these things by hand. So the app that I like to use is Mint. Hi, Michael. Thanks for hopping on. So I like to use Mint, which allows me to answer those questions pretty quick. I pull it up on my phone and I see my expenses year to date, weekly, I see monthly, right? So I see actually how it's tracking against my budget. I also see the income that came in, and there's another tab in that app that allows me to see a progress that I'm making with savings for my goals. So if you do not know these things, you are missing out. This is why a lot of times I see clients have stress around their finances, because the foundation is not set, because the basic, these silly simple things are not understood. So I encourage you, as you come in and watch me talk here, start tracking these things. So reach out to me and let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to help you set it up, but at the very least, download mint.com app. Now, there's a couple of other ones that I see other clients are using. I personally do not have experience with them. One is Personal Capital. Another is Quicken. So Quicken actually bought Mint. Mint was a startup about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 now. And so now Quicken owns Mint, but I still like their interface of Mint better. So please, I encourage you to do that. Now, the other thing that I do on a money date, and so for those of you who are watching, you guys are welcome, and please drop an emoji, drop a number, drop something in the comment section so I know you actually came on live, because what happens is when the video stops, I do not have a record who actually viewed it. So let me know you were here, but as you're doing that, tell me what has been your money win for the week. You know, it actually, sometimes I'm really like this. Okay, I know what I've done well. I know what the the good feeling I have, but it took me a little bit of time to figure out what for this week what I have. So I've shared with you before that I've been kind of spending quite a bit of time at the end of the year planning out my business, planning out my personal goals, and things that I'm trying to accomplish. And one piece that was missing for me, because I was feeling a bit restless in these first few weeks of the year, is the actual implementation, right? I've got the goals. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm supposed to be doing every day, every week. but it was getting to a point where like the calendar's over here, things I want to do are over here. I'm like, okay, finally, like, are they going to come together? So I actually over this weekend, I was able to sit down and kind of just configure my calendar where morning is, and I figured this out, morning is the time for me to focus on money generating activities, right? So what can I do? Who can I call? Who can I talk? So I do a lot of prospecting and things like that. So, and then afternoon, and it also because I am sort of between the coasts, I'm most of the time on my, on the West Coast, and I have also traveled to the East Coast. So my team is kind of spread out, so I have to be sort of between the time zones. So they're gone by 2 o'clock, right? West Coast, or maybe 3 o'clock. So I have to do a lot of things, the coordination with them in the morning. And then, so I figured that having meetings and other activities are going to work better for me. It was actually just more of a realization and finally sitting down and saying, okay, how can I make this work? So I do feel very excited about it because I can actually see how it's going to come together for me. So that's my money win. How does this tie into my finances? Oh, very directly, because I am on fire to get all of the things I planned for so this year. So let me know, what is it for you? Just think about something, right? The idea is to pause, reflect, and give yourself that, that space, give yourself the time to actually appreciate. That's it. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. So, but as you continue listening to me, maybe something will come to mind. I always like to see what other people are grateful for. And that's been the biggest realization I had in 2017, is that you can shift around your negative mood, you can shift around your, your relationships, as long as you start realizing and appreciating what you've got. So with that in mind, let's dive into the actual topic. So merging finances, right? And you guys might be thinking, well, Anna, what are you talking about? We've been doing our finances as couples, right? And one thing I want to point out, in the modern world we live today, you do not have to be married, you do not have to live in the same household, and it's not for, for traditional couples, it's for anyone. You can have joint finances with your parents, you can have joint finances with your kids, with your business partners, anybody, right? It's really the idea is, how do you do it? What works? So that's the first thing you have to realize, right? So if you've been doing it for a while a certain way, great. If it works, then don't change it. But if there are tensions, if there are things that you're thinking to perhaps do better, then why don't we dive in and talk about it and just a few more details. Now, an interesting statistic I found through, this was LearnVest data research last year, actually 2016, only 18% of couples, right, have their finances separately. So majority of people somehow combine their finances, right? Once they're starting to have, and I think about combining finances is when I see couples have a joint household, right? So we're going to focus primarily on that, but as I clarified, it could be on the spectrum, okay? So it doesn't matter where you start, right? It really comes down to what works for you. So I'm going to discuss 2 typical ways that I see couples have their finances organized, and I'll point out to you which way might be more beneficial for you, and some ideas of how you can actually arrange things. You guys have heard me talk about how we at my house, Yuri and I, manage our finances. This is actually why I have this show, by the way, because we had to find a way that worked for both of us because of the busy schedules, because of the structure we wanted to have, because we just wanted to streamline it. So I'll dive deeper a little bit more in terms of sharing with you how I do it. But so here's the first way. Are you ready? Okay, let's get into it. The first way, I like to call it, what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. Isn't that cute? But basically, what that means is combining all your finances together, okay? So here's who it's the most beneficial for, right? It's not for everybody, so remember that. But this is what Yuri and I did. We've been together, we've been married for 12 and a half years, been together for 13 and a half years. When we got together, we had no money. So it's for, we just, whatever we had, we felt like we could just put together and start fresh, from scratch as a joint sort of force. Now, it's also good for couples who may have the same amount of assets and they feel like they bring the same contribution to the table, right? Or you just really don't care what's the amount of assets you have or debt. You just feel like it's the most transparent way to do things. So kind of want to put everything in one pot. And why not? There's nothing wrong with that. So how do we do something like that? Well, obviously, if it's a joint operation, we presumably will have a joint savings account, a joint checking account from which you will pay your expenses, your income will be deposited there, and so everything is sort of kind of mixed in one pot. Now, that's the structure that Yuri and I had initially, and we actually found that having two checking accounts made more sense just because it allowed us to pay our fixed expenses and not have to worry about them, and then variable expenses were the ones that we kind of wanted to have more handle on. And so it's the same idea. Both accounts are joint. It's just I wanted to have a more precise structure. We also have a joint credit card. And so now something to point out, credit cards are typically not joint accounts. It's a one owner, right? So somebody is a primary owner of the credit card, the other person is authorized user. But that way you can actually, both partners can charge the same credit card so that it's actually really neat, because Mint.com, right? That's why I like Mint, tracks the data, right? So all the spending is sort of put into one. Hi, Lianочка, good to have you. Oh my gosh, all the way from across the world. So all of that data gets collected into Mint, and that's why I like checking it, because I have it all. So there's really no secrets. That's the idea. Now, the other point I want to make here in this what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine category is that Yuri and I had to agree on the spending amount, right? When you have everything combined, you have to have an understanding how one partner will be spending the money. Like, where is there a point when you have to have a conversation and you say, well, you can't just go out and spend X amount of dollars, right? And so you say, up until a certain amount. So I think, and we've done this years ago, but it was like $200. Hi, Andre. It was like, if you need to spend more than $200, then we need to have a conversation. So whether it was coming from the checking account, was it coming from the savings account or a credit card, what is it for? Because it was kind of, a substantial amount. We kind of still stuck around with that. And, it's just, if you want to have a balance, because that's really the frustration that I had initially when I took over the management of our finances, is like there was not a way for me to feel and say, all right, where are we, right? And so we had these precise ideas, right? A precise structure, right? Or rules. Rules is a better term. So then, right? Then it's not a misunderstanding, and nobody was feeling like they were left out, right? So agree on what that is. All right. Now, also think about, right? So I always advocate for having an emergency fund kind of on the side. So that's something that your system needs to have regardless. So how is that going to be managed? Are you replenishing it on a monthly basis? How are you contributing to that? So I feel like this what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine operation is pretty straightforward. Now, obviously some of things like retirement accounts, your 401ks, IRAs, whatever it is that you have, maybe investment accounts, some of those accounts, obviously, you have to keep in your own name just because the structure of them does not allow to have a joint names of them. But that's fine, because after a while, it would be more of a combination of what is the household, overall financial picture. So now let's talk about what does that mean to actually, the option number 2, what does that mean to be an independent, right? So I call that, that second category is keeping my independence. Now, there is totally nothing wrong with that. There are different different options or different times in your life where you may feel like, well, I've got to do this, right? And here's some reasons. What are the couples or what are the people that I think this is the most beneficial for, or why they feel like it is? So it's if you feel like you want to actually just have control over your finances, right? You feel like you've done it for a long time, or you feel like it's not, it's how you actually, it's probably more of this, the more I think about it, it's how you were brought up, right? In the household where I grew up, my parents, there was not, it was not that my mom had her own operations or her own finances and my dad had separately. So it was always everything put in the same pot. The same thing was for Yuri. So maybe that's what really was just in the back of our minds when we got together and said, all right, this is how we're going to do it. Maybe your family managed your finances separately, and you kind of saw that as an example growing up. So you decided, hey, that's a norm and I can do it that way. Now, what I also see with my clients is that sometimes when people get together and they're older, right? We were really young when we got married, so it didn't matter. No money whatsoever, right? But sometimes couples get married and get together, not even necessarily married, start living together, having joint households, and they're older, right? They probably have previous relationships or previous obligations. They have family that they want to support. So combining the finances of those kinds of couples may be just a little bit more difficult. So at the very minimum, let's say, all right, well, we can do it, but we still kind of have to maintain our own independence. So I'm just giving you ideas to think about. It's really, again, coming down to what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to accomplish, right? Some feel like they want to have more control and, maybe less transparency about what's happening. Others feel like, I don't care, just get it done. We're kind of, in the same boat, right? And, somebody takes more responsibility for that. Now, so here's, there's actually two options in this category of how you can manage it. These are the most typical ones I see. So you've got two partners who have keep their finances separately. Each of them may still maintain their own checking account, their own savings account, obviously retirement accounts, and things like that are also separate. Credit card is separate. So there's nothing that particularly for these couples is joint, except that they are living together. There's a household exists. So a couple of ways. So you could actually set up your paychecks. For example, I have a couple that I'm working with right now. They've set up their paychecks to be split up. Actually, what they did is they created a household account, right? They called that a household joint account. And what they do is they put 50% of their check, each of them, into that account, which then turns around and pays all of their bills. So rent, groceries, whatever, all the things that they've got on their list. So that way, they're accounted for what their obligations are for the monthly bills. But then also they have their own accounts on the side, and they can just maintain that for their own personal use. So that's one way. The other couple I worked with not too long ago had set up their finances a little bit, same structure, but it was, one was making more than the other. And so, that person felt like, well, I can contribute more, right? So it's not actually like, even split 50-50. So they did a 60-40 contribution, right? So 60%, because he was making 60% of income. So he felt like, okay, I'm going to contribute to 60% of expenses, and she said, all right, well, I'm going to contribute 40%. So that's also fine. It really doesn't matter as long as there is an understanding of how things will be done. It is a little bit more difficult, like when you have these kinds of couples who come for financial planning. It's like, okay, well, so how, it's a little bit more aggregation and combining everything. Like my favorite thing is to have Mint sort of running in the background, collecting the data. It's a little bit more difficult to do when you have the two people. Although, yes, you can connect all of the accounts into sort of one portal and still kind of get the same picture. But it's doable. It's just additional extra steps. Now, there are couples, so this is kind of probably the most typical way. So we still have some of our independence, but we have a household operations account. I've seen having sort of another, not just operations account, like checking account to pay bills, also a savings account to account for emergencies. Because I want you to think about how how would you address that question if emergency came up and you have your accounts separately? Yes, one can take care of it, the other can take care of it, and you can sort of take turns, but if it's, if there was more clearly defined structure, then it just makes things easier. Now, the second way, which is I think a little bit more, it requires more work, but it's kind of where you have everything separately. There's not a household account, right? And it's really, we are doing these things separately. So one couple I had actually last year, it was a bit more work, and so I pointed this out to them, but the wife was paying all the expenses, right? So she was the one who was kind of doing daily, monthly reconciliations, all of that. So she would sit down and pay all of the expenses out of her own account. And then her husband wrote her a check and she would give him a total, say, okay, you owe me $5,000 or $3,000. So he would write her a check, and then she would deposit that check into her own checking account, and that kind of just made things even in their mind. I felt like, there are two advantages here, right? She had all the data, so it was good, because she could pull all of that up and say, all right, here's where we are sort of as a household. It led one person to kind of, be more in charge, and the other person was sort of more loose and trusted and said, all right, you take care of it. I felt like it was just a lot of work, right? In terms of, okay, here's, you have to always write me a check, or, a lot of times I see clients also use these apps where you can just transfer money between accounts, PayPal, Venmo. There's another one I used just recently, something Cash. It's a little green app, says Cash on it. So it's doable, but I feel like just an extra step. So the idea, right, at least in my mind, is how can we streamline these things, right? Now for this keeping independence category of folks, is that you have to, if you're married, that's probably somewhat understood, how things are going to be divided and who, maybe it's not. It's not like when I got married, Yuri and I said, this is how things will work. It's assumed that if one partner needs help, maybe they lost their job, maybe they're sick and can't work, maybe they took some time off, maybe they had a baby and they're, on maternity leave and they aren't earning as much income, whatever situations are that life brings. So have an agreement, and right, and when I say agreement, it could be something more formal, right? You can write it down if you really feel like that's going to get you somewhere. But at least have an understanding, like if your finances are separately and one person was responsible for covering, certain things, well, what happens, right? I know you can't think all the situations through, but at least some of the most, typical things, right? What happens if there's an emergency, right, in your household, in your joint place where you share your life? What happens? How do you, this is where it becomes a little bit more tricky. Where's your emergency fund? Where do you each have one, and you kind of say, all right, well, I dedicated this particular account, and this is my contribution, and then the other partner says, I dedicated my savings account or whatever it is, checking account, and sort of you kind of manage that as situations come up. So it's just, I think that this creates extra steps, but they are very doable, okay? They are very doable. The only sort of suggestion out of all of it, whatever way you decide to do, hi Jenny, thanks for hopping on, whatever way you actually decide to approach it, at the very least, have a conversation, have a discussion with your partner. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's the best way is how it works for you. But if there's a clear communication and if there's a constantly come back and review and update, that's what makes a system work, right? So I encourage you to have money dates. This is why I actually came up with this idea, because I wanted to have clear communication, clear conversation about what's happening. So that's kind of what I've got for you today. Now, I also want to close. I've got a quote to share, but let me know how are you managing your finances? Is there a way that I haven't discussed that works for you? Let me know. I'm always curious to see, because it's one of those geeky things that I like to observe in my everyday work. So here's a quote for you that I think kind of fits well with this theme. There's no one right way to handle money as a couple, but there are plenty ways to handle it wrong. And it's Sally Herstead. So I challenge you, right, to find a way that works for you, but make sure that you actually staying on the top of it. Thanks for hopping on. You guys are awesome. I'll see you next week. And don't forget, you got to check in with yourself. If this is a reminder for you and you haven't done your weekly check-ins, go do it. And so that next week when you come in, you actually feel accomplished. See you later. Thanks for tuning in.